Hello, dear friends. Today is our 11th August Monday, and we have a very important and difficult week. And I suggest that in order to understand where we are, the coordinates in which we are now, let's go back to the beginning of August and see what happened since then. Let me remind you that by the beginning of August, Trump imitated himself or was really extremely frustrated by Putin for not going to Trump's proposal to take a 30-day peace deal. Trump came to the point where he gave his ultimatum. If until August 8th Putin does not take the idea of ceasefire, then sanctions are announced, which were reclaimed as tip-top sanctions. The initiator of the idea itself was the famous Lindsey Graham. And that's when, a couple of days left until these sanctions were announced, a call is given from the Kremlin to the White House, and the Kremlin invites Witkoff, well, in general, so that Trump can send his messenger, because Putin wants to report something important. Trump is already, it seems, moving because, well, until the sanctions were announced, there were literally 2 days left. The closer they are, the less teeth they have. Trump has already expressed doubts that they can act strongly on Russia. Russia, as it were, is used to these sanctions. And then, as it were, the rescue stick, the aid from the Kremlin, we can report something to you, send your messenger. The messenger was sent, as always, to the most delicate, potentially expensive cases of Trump, and Trump came to Witkoff. He spent 3 hours there negotiating, and in Kremlin they said, let him go all the way back, meet with Trump, personally report the results, and we then made some expanded comments. And then Witkoff was still, I think, in the air when happy Trump said, the Russians made serious suggestions, and this type changes everything. One of these suggestions, that is, if the Russian proposal ended as much as it was important, then Putin invited Trump to a meeting in the Heights. And this allegedly changes the situation extremely much. The Russians made a counter-proposal, which is very serious. Well, now we are in a completely different system of coordination. Then when Witkoff came, after which Trump stated that somewhere, probably, it will be needed or it will have to run to some kind of exchange, a double exchange of territories. And then, as the sound of a clear sky, there was a message that someone was lying to someone during a telephone. Conversation, and as it turned out, no one made any concessions. Putin did not go to concessions, not even compromises. Moreover, nothing has changed at all in the Russian position, and where they were at the beginning of the aggression, there they are now. This is related to the Russian position. But Trump has already announced that Russia will make a serious proposal that deserves attention, which needs to be discussed, and maybe this is the way to the world. And about all this, they somehow already forget about the ultimatum of Trump about the acceptance of Putin, the agreement of Putin on the moratorium on the ceasefire, and somehow this question no longer stands. Now there are much more posts. Well, as a result, so if you look at the perspective back, then there is such a picture that, at least, the Kremlin made the White House again. Well, the question stands like this. The only thing that is not clear is whether the Kremlin made it or not. Yes, he took part in this operation. But who took part in it and what kind of role? Did Witkoff take part in this and what kind of role? And finally, did Trump take part in this? Because, well, 2 days before the need to introduce sanctions, it was fueled, and by the way, we discussed it, his extreme unwillingness to go to these measures. And they, as they say, decreased. You remember, the Kremlin stated 500%. Trump then reduced it to 100%, well, and then he said everything more and more, that it could be ineffective. That is, the presence of an operation for me personally is an operation in the dilapidation. That is, they developed in the end the whole world, in large part. The shelter for the day was replaced, there are no more conversations. Everyone said only the ceasefire, the 30-day one. They didn't talk about changing the territory yet, about the security guarantee. This one was putting on the second stage, on the negotiations about the world. By the way, I was talking about something. Do you remember? I told you. Here tomorrow they will take the idea of stopping the fire in Moscow for 30 days. Okay, well, what's next? Now it is necessary to talk about the world. And who says about the world? No, there is no agenda, even the side does not know the meaning of the positions of each other. And now they are here. Now it turns out the day's flag is completely changed. Sanctions are not applied. On the agreement on the ceasefire for 30 days, Putin did not go and is on the same position that was before, that is, on the maximalist ones. That is, in large part, he is now under these sanctions, but they are not there. That is, Kremlin definitely made a mistake. Did he participate in these turns further? Well, the Kremlin knows that he walks without a translator, that he does not have an assistant who would lead the chronology, so to speak, wrote down what he is talking about. This time they say that there was a translator from the embassies, but I must tell you, even the presence of a translator from the embassies at Witkoff does not mean anything. We remember that in the 19th year, during the meeting in Helsinki, with an eye on the voice between Putin and Trump, there was a translator from Trump's side, the same from Putin's side, and we know what was happening there, but nothing like this. We don't know anything, so Rubio did not cost anything to send some special translator, who uses special trust, which will in any case be silent like a fish, whatever it says. And the past negotiations with Witkoff will be interpreted the way Witkoff, Trump, and Putin will need. Therefore, we know that Witkoff is not a professional. They could fool him, mix it all up, hint, he has no idea, well, developer. This is the story that everyone should do their own thing. And for him, maybe in the Lugansk region, in Kherson region, who from somewhere, where will the dark forest come from? Well, just mix it up. Or maybe he didn't mix it up, because as the foreign media now notes, he is in an active, serious business with Len Blavatnik, a billionaire, head of the list of most rich people in the UK, and which in 2023 was included in the sanctions list under the sign of Zelensky, for the harmful work in the attitude of Ukraine. And here is the personal ambassador of Trump. He is doing negotiations with Putin through a person who is connected with business relations, with those who have put sanctions on Ukraine for harmful work against Putin, against Ukraine, that is, on the face of conflicts of interests. Therefore, I think that during these business contracts, it was always possible to make a deal about the fact that somewhere something will be missed or something will be confused, and so on. As for Trump, what happened to him was also a rescue, so to speak, stick and scissors, because 2 days were left. He saw it, he didn't want to introduce sanctions, and then brotherly help from the Kremlin came. Therefore, he in a hurry. Also, Witkoff was on the fly. Maybe he did not tell everyone completely. Trump immediately pleased everyone and himself that everything is going well. Everything is moving towards a successful resolution of the problem. This is how, gentlemen, we have come to today's day. That is, it was, in large part, a special operation of the Kremlin, the goal of which was, first of all, to jump into sanctions, and secondly, to help Trump in some way to save his face, because, well, if he had announced weak sanctions, they would have hit him too, again, the chicken again he would have given way. He would have not announced it, even worse, and he did not want to announce the strong ones there. That is, and for Trump, for all these three, well, Witkoff is like this, with all this technical, so to speak, expo, and for Putin, and for Trump, everything more or less turned out normal. Now the question of what I said 2 weeks ago, the question of peace has been shot. Now, although it is not there, but they have already talked about the conditions on which the world is falling, that is. Now Putin says, let's agree on my conditions and then I will give you peace, the ceasefire. Here we are, we have come close to the last. To today's Saturday, Sunday, on Friday. Friday was an important statement made by European countries plus the Euro Commission. The largest countries of Europe took part in this, the leaders of Europe stated its positions. I told you that it is expected there should be a presence there, Europe, because the regularization in Ukraine is the most important question of European, besides Ukrainian and European. Ukraine is a part of Europe's security. So, a joint statement. This is a statement in general. This is a figure of diplomatic art. I will tell them in the age when we all live in the sixth room. Real, here you are, look, I specifically demonstrate this to you. Here starts the statement. We welcome the efforts of President Trump to stop the killings of Ukraine, to stop the aggressive war of the Russian Federation and the achievements of a fair and strong world and the security for Ukraine. This is when someone, Europeans, understood what happened to this trip of Witkoff and what kind of mess, and how it replaced the situation day by day. Nevertheless, people of an age remember the Soviet Union, when any political event, economic or cultural, was accompanied by thanks. Personally, Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev, who is doing titanic work, and everyone laughed. Even the joke was like this in the Soviet Union. The winter has passed, the summer has come, thanks to the party or thanks to Brezhnev for this. Now we are welcomed by the effort of President Trump. And what to do? The sixth room, the sandbox, there is a difficult child there. It is necessary to say magic words to him, control words, without which he does not go anywhere. Well done, guys, but this is the sixth room. Next, they say what we have, how to control the situation, active diplomacy, support for Ukraine, and pressure on the Russian Federation. Well, the pressure on the Russian Federation, it was supposed to start on March 8, that is, they drove through, but the Europeans are again pulling it out on the surface. How to say, the cat is there. Remember, we did not forget. So the diplomacy, the pressure on the Russian Federation. Further, they admit that Europe is directly interested in what is happening. Reports that we are ready to support this work both with diplomatic means as well as the most important, the continuation of our significant military and financial support of Ukraine. That is, on a large scale. Now the question is how these negotiations would not end. Europe will have to, well, it, I think, has already agreed with this, bear the main award for financial, military, and diplomatic help of Ukraine. The next, then the main, the life and important interests of the security of Ukraine and Europe. That is, it is not broken off. A brilliant thought, here is a small one, and each note is literally the maximum of 2 suggestions written in a granite. These life and important interests, including the need for reliable and deserving trust in Ukraine's security guarantees. Significant negotiations can only take place in the conditions of the fire stopping, which Trump did not announce. He was stuck in this case again. His budgeted ultimatum to Putin, the path to peace in Ukraine cannot be determined without the help of Ukraine. We are still loyal to the principle according to which international borders cannot be changed by force. This is a crime. The crime, they remind, is that what Russia did in relation to Ukraine is an illegal invasion. That is, the crime is. A rude violation, well, it is listed there, what and so on. In short, fundamental documents of international law, and we support our unwavering obedience to sovereignty, independence, and territorial justice of Ukraine as it is confirmed by international law. And they are not in vain, I will tell you later, they are not in vain. They wrote all this because, that is, here every nail is beaten into the right place. We are the only ones, like Europeans, and full of courage to jointly promote our interests. That is, it is our European interests that you will now solve or try to solve with Putin. And we will continue to closely cooperate with President Trump. Well, nothing is happening here. As well as with President Zelensky in the interests of the world in Ukraine, which protectionates our life-changing interests in the field of security. We recorded previous videos with a link to Chinese, and this is an objective assessment, that with the conclusion of the trade agreement between the EU and also separate UK from the UK with the United States, a single economic and military political bloc of the US-Europe has developed. And this is a colossal event that, in turn, changed the map of the world. There has never been such a thing. It is feel that Trump has infiltrated, or, in any case, his closest environment. That is, this is the factor to loop through which or somehow to jump over it, as Trump looped through August 8. When the ultimatum to Putin expired, so to do the same with Europe as a whole, and this is the largest market in the world, one of the largest, three, will not work out, so he, so to speak, was put to his face, and good job, Europeans, this is a very strong and right position. The Russian position, the final one, so to speak, that we have now on the table. Witkoff had changed his orders 3 times. The first is what Trump announced, then there is a massive breakthrough, ready, it seems, Putin is ready to leave the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions. If Ukraine leaves the territories it still holds in Donetsk and Lugansk regions. And it turned out to be nonsense. Then, otherwise, it all was now that Putin is not ready to leave from anywhere. He will still, in addition to all this, he requires international recognition, at least, of the annexation of Crimea. Plus, still neutrality of Ukraine, that is, not entering NATO. That is, the same thing for this position he has been for a long time. On the 8th, he should have been under Trump's sanctions. But so, we understand the chicken who happened to the chicken. Vance appeared yesterday on the Fox channel. Where he fixed, so to speak, the last one that freshens the position of the United States in relation to Ukraine. He stated that we will no longer help Ukraine with our money. That is, the money of the American people. The Americans are tired of it, as Vance said, that their money is going to help Ukraine. I must say that the President of the United States is not well informed about the public opinion of the United States about the attitude of Americans, including the Republicans, about the attitude of help Ukraine and the attitude of Russian Putin and Russia. Therefore, he was a little distracted by the time since Trump came to the White House. The number of Americans who are in support of Ukraine has significantly increased, and the attitude of Russia to Putin has significantly deteriorated. Well, aside from him, let's believe that this is so. a rhetorical statement is part of the rhetorical statement. More, he said an important thing that we will continue, we are ready, and then sell the weapons to the Europeans who will supply it to Ukraine. This is a business, this is, so to speak, not beneficial to the American payer. This is a business, okay, as they say, with a bad name, and that's good. And this is very important, and it must be continued. Next, the most important thought, he said that Ukraine is, and then he allowed the statement, which I would like to clarify, Ukraine is the backdoor of Europe. And some analysts, commentators in the Russian-speaking space, they all said it like a backdoor. Well, like not beautiful, he called Ukraine. I would not agree with this very much with such an assessment of this statement, backdoor. Backdoor is a statement that came to us from the field of IT. And even more so from the hacker's sphere of hacker activity. Backdoor is that place through which the enemy. In the form of a harmful virus or some kind of filth or some kind of software that can put the system under control. This is just the place through which this negative influence or negative factor or actor can enter the system. That is, this is in fact a backdoor. This is the space through which the window, let's say so, through which. Russia as this harmful virus or worm or the enemy, so to speak, the actor who wants to put Europe's system under control, can go in. That is, it is a critically important window of Europe, and he said the right thing, and Europe knows this, and now she heard it again. That is, it is that backdoor window that cannot be left open for the penetration of the enemy element. It needs to be protected. Here is the conclusion that needs to be made from the statement of Trump-Vance that Ukraine is the backdoor of Europe. This is the window that separates Europe from enemy Russia. It can be said frontier, I used to call it, or it can be called backdoor. I believe that there is nothing destructive here. It is said, in fact, right and even very right, according to the meaning that Ukraine has for European security. As we saw in the statement of the leading countries of Europe, that is, the Euro Commission, which I just quote, it is all reflected. Well, today, Kalos called a video conference. The Minister of Foreign Affairs made a video for the EU to discuss the situation, to take specific decisions. Apparently, there will be a scenario there to work out what, how, in what case during the development of the event, so or so, the European Union will be made. That is, in large part now there is a question of, well, that is, Europe, the European Union, it was on the outskirts, because today I heard one of the analysts from Poland. He generally said that Europe can now be in the same situation as the UK and France were in 1956. When the Soviet Channel was nationalized, the British and French were removed from it, and they wanted to return control over the Soviet Channel by force. They were ready for this, and the United States was against it. And Khrushchev then threatened that the great states, other states, would say, if the third great state threatened. Them with nuclear weapons, well, a hint that if we, the UK and France, threat them with nuclear weapons, it was a bluff, of course, but the United States itself, they said to the French and the Americans, we will not interfere with this case with the Soviet Channel, and that's it. And on this, as the Polish analyst said, a serious geopolitical role ended. In the UK, France, and in general, Europe and the world. So you cannot lead to such a situation. Moreover, such a powerful bloc between Europe and the United States of America has recently developed. We are going with this. What is expected? What can happen? There are negative factors, and you have already seen them here. These are all behind the scenes. Somewhere between them there is a back door through which they communicate, I mean Kremlin and Belarusian. But there are also objective factors. One of them is the position of Europe, and another factor which I consider very important, this is the Nobel Peace Prize. Indeed, Trump apparently has a new idea, he wants it, and he must understand that by giving Ukraine away, he will not receive any Nobel Peace Prize. He gets a vision of the entire civilized world, well, and the generations. This is still, as you can see, somewhere in 41, 42 years or 41 years. When the battle for Britain was still going on in the air, the Luftwaffe tried to suppress the system of anti-aircraft defense of the UK, and suddenly Roosevelt and Hitler are meeting in Alaska and share the UK territory, well, and there all Europe remains under Hitler, because Hitler said, well, let's take into account the realities in places, all Europe is under us, so. What are we talking about? I can't imagine, yes, such a conversation between Roosevelt and Hitler, but the situation is so objective that it potentially reminds me of this. What? To do, that is, to honestly give it up on the conditions declared by Putin to Witkoff, and about the fact that Ukraine should leave everywhere, disarming no NATOs and so on, and Trump to take it. And it turns out he recently said new important suggestions, and not Russians are ready for something important there. Trump is hardly able to do this, so one of the options is they will try. Together, they will try to transfer, pay attention to another, even more important object than the regularization of Ukraine, the question of global security. There would only be a third world war, this time a thermonuclear war, to switch to, we are the great state. We must stop the world at the edge of the abyss and take all the necessary measures for this. We must cooperate, that is, it is necessary to cooperate to try to make it so that Ukraine is one question, and the cooperation between Putin and Trump is another question. For Trump, there are tough cases. For Putin, there he returns to the world as a geostrategist, a geopolitist who is accepted. Recently, he could not go to Brazil. South Africa was afraid that he would be taken by force and given to The Hague. He goes to Alaska because the United States is not the head of this agreement on the international court, and therefore there is no concern that here, in Alaska, Putin will be arrested and prosecuted. And this, I think, is not done by chance. In any case, what the Russians do is not done by chance. On the 15th, this meeting will take place. On the 12th, the Russians feel, well, they call it the weapon of the idiot, and the Russians consider and present this to the world as a new wonder of the Putin's weapon. This is a cruise missile, a potential carrier of a nuclear warhead with a nuclear engine, which, if such a missile is made or launched into serious production, then it will be a cruise missile with a nuclear warhead, which can fly endless. Well, how much a nuclear reactor works. The United States worked on this project in the second half of the 50s and came to the conclusion that this is a dangerous missile for those who have it, who can launch it either on that territory or for that territory on which it is located. Why? Because this engine flies a missile, leaving a monstrous radioactive trace behind it, because the engine is not protected, and it should be protected, well, as for example, the Chernobyl power plant, that is, the nuclear power plant was packed in a sarcophagus. Yes, this is about, well, of course, other proportions and other materials, such as sarcophagus or tail light should be packed, and this is an engine, but if it is so packed, then the missile will gain monstrous proportions, enormous weight, and it will no longer be a missile, for God's sake. And the Americans put a cross on this in '64. That is, there are other types of weapons that can be developed. They focus their attention on this. Russians are in the search of Wunderwaffe, as this is the Führer, when he realized that the war was beginning to go in the negative direction, began to develop all these types of weapons. He did really develop something, mostly in general. He did not have time, fortunately. So the Russians began to develop all this, and the last test of this Wunderwaffe took place in 2019, and a catastrophe occurred. Then there was an explosion with the release of a large number of radios. In the city of Severodvinsk, the background of the radio sun was recorded 16 times. 5 people, scientists, nuclear researchers from Rosatom, died in this case. As established by American intelligence, first the missile was launched. It fell somewhere into the water, the sea. It is not known where. This did not be said. Then the Russians began to exhaust this missile, and the engine was detonated. That's where it occurred, the explosion with the release of radiation with all the consequences. Since then, the Russians have been working on this and further, and now on August 12 they should test this case. You see, if these countries, Russia, first of all, led normal people, but it is even clear to the idiot that before such an important international meeting, Putin was the last time he was on the territory of the United States, I think, in the 18th year. And then, after all these negotiations, such an important meeting about the world, and conduct the test of this crocosiabra, which is normal in a safe state, first of all, for the owner of this bomb. It is unthinkable, but Russians want to send a signal. This is our wonder weapon. You listen to how this will creak. Orcs on gold diggers will creak about this. That is, they will demonstrate this test. That is, the Americans, all U.S. electronic intelligence sources are already ready for this. Russians, in large part, do not announce it because they do not know how it will end, but the test will be in any case. And it will be a signal, the signal of this flabby mole, a hunk with a distorted mind. He is still threatening. That is, the economy is in a state of pre-infarct, but he continues to threaten the whole world, promises to show him Kuzkina's mother. But although he is a combatant on a large scale, you can agree with this, as American experts say. That is, this missile, if it is made, it can play a role even if it does not explode, even if there are no nuclear warheads there. It is also called a strike, or nuclear strike power, or nuclear warhead. That is, only with this engine can it strike the object, and there will be a radiation, well, kinetic, as it will be, there will be kinetic damage, and there will be radiation. Therefore, gentlemen, it is necessary to have this in mind. Now, what to do in this situation? What can happen? Well, first of all, Europe made a wonderful statement. It should be ready, since this is a question. They perfectly understand that this is a question of their own security. Europe, that is, Ukraine, is a border, and this is a window that needs to be held under control, so that it does not penetrate there. This is the border, so to speak, of Europe, the window to the border of Europe, and it should be under reliable control. Now, Ukraine has two options. The first one What can it actually influence on the course of these negotiations, in principle, abstractly? Any side before the negotiations should rest on those trumpets. If they are there, which it has on the battlefields, then the matter does not matter. Since the time when Sirkin was appointed head of the committee, actual strategic control over these military operations, as the American and European newspaper wrote about it, the largest, the most authoritative, came to the hands of Yermak, who was getting involved in a specific, important operation. And as a result, we came to the point where, unfortunately, we don't have any trumpets left on the battlefield. The enemy crawls slowly, carrying terrible losses, but nevertheless he crawls. And the AFU deliberately needs, first of all, live force, and it is gone. And no one has yet to find a source to take it from. Moreover, at a time when this most difficult situation is developing, it is necessary to solve it. Western correspondents who work in Kiev, who love Ukraine, they are patriots. More patriots than many Ukrainian corruption officials. They report with regret on air here in the West about the fact that even now corruption kills, that is, it makes a crime against the armed forces of Ukraine. But it is all clear to everyone what role drones are playing now. And drones, different companies develop, produce drones, receive money for this. Therefore, the leadership of some companies that have a connection with corruption officials forces them to work against other companies that produce drones. For example, to send the best engineers and specialists to the front. That's how blowing up the opportunity of the competition for the production of drones. And this, as American journalists say, that is, Western journalists. Well, in addition to the fact that people are depriving themselves of their best specialists, in addition to this, the possibility of the leak of information about these drones is threatened. The enemy of this engineer who was sent to the front will be captured, and he is a drone specialist. He can tell all the secrets under torture. That is, this is a monstrous crime that is currently taking place at the moment. Who has the opportunity to strike such a life-changing enterprise in Ukraine for the production of drones? Who has such an opportunity in Kiev? Think for yourself. What to do in this situation? Well, Europe, support, thank you, you need to take off your hat. You need to act symmetrically, asymmetrically, Ukraine, in connection with the lack of live force or with problems, and in connection with the action of the fifth column, you need to act in non-standard walks. And then, again, I pay your attention to the opportunities that have opened the way for Russia, or the stop of Russia from observed the deal to eliminate medium and small-range missiles. I wrote all this down in the previous video, and the test of Blavatnik says the same thing, increases the pain even more. Then there is a madness sitting there which makes such a weapon which is dangerous for Russia itself. And nevertheless, that is, a weapon like a court day. The last thing, I believe what can happen. There was such a concern that Trump, well, first of all, a meeting eye to eye. This cannot be allowed. This cannot be allowed by chance. Well, of course, if he runs to this door to Brother Vassal, you recognize Brother Kolya, that is, no one stops him but the meeting one-on-one with. The door's closed, it is categorically opposite of Trump, America, Europe, and Ukraine. Putin plays the role of the alpha man in this duel, unfortunately, but taking into account all sorts of factors, including the position of Europe, as well as the thirst for the Nobel Peace Prize. I think that this meeting will not lead to a catastrophic result, and a catastrophic result would be when, after a 3-hour meeting with the doors closed, Trump comes out and says we have agreed, Ukraine liberates, and then all this starts there. And no NATO, and we are stopping even the sale of weapons at all. This would be a catastrophe. This will not be, I think it will be, so to speak, a preliminary meeting that will open a process after itself, a process where the conditions of the world will be discussed, and it would be necessary to return Mr. Trump to his ultimatum, from which he unbuttoned the ultimatum of August 8 and remind him that Putin has not yet fulfilled his ultimatum. He stupidly stands on his positions on which he was when Trump announced this ultimatum, so either the question needs to be solved or the 30-day peace, or Donald, our dear Trump, is finally announcing the sanctions promised. This is the situation, gentlemen. Well, all this comes out of the background, I would say the background, or let's say at the same time as this. Yesterday, the journal The Atlantic published an article. I will remind you, it has once again emphasized this publication. It is one of the oldest in America for people with a high, well, let's say, with a decent IQ who can understand what is good, what is bad, and take logical decisions. So the article under the headlines, Trump made an unforgivable sin in front of the Americans. Well, it reminds us that now he has, in general, there was only one person who, after the Second World War at the moment, is below the rating of Trump now. And this one person, the same Trump, only in the first condensation, then he had 35 at the end of the term, now he has 37 and continues to decrease. Well, okay, it reduces by one question, by the second, by the third, but its mistake is that the Americans begin to open with horror. They took it, the presidents, for what? They made sure that he was a specialist in economy, a successful businessman who will make everyone rich. And America will survive. The main thing is they will survive happy. Everyone will have their own six-pack of beer in the evening or 12 bottles of beer. Cigarettes, he will have an automatic rifle, which he shot during the day. Well, looking at football or baseball in the evening, he will tell what kind of strong America is. And America is a white person. Yes, as it is now, America has opened that this is not the person who did not buy, and that he, the newspaper writes, America begins to understand that he is inept. What does inept mean? That is, Trump is inept. What does inept mean? I took it with all the synonyms that are transferred with which this word can be transferred to Russian. This is an unfit person, unable to do anything, stupid, well, to put it simply, a fool. And the Americans came to a shocker state and come quickly to this. That is, they hoped that he would help the economy as he promised, the financially. Another question. How they could hope for this when a person plant 455, almost $500 million, inherited from the father in the course of 6 personal bankruptcies. This is necessary to know how. And to see the Americans that this person will now make you happy. He had no time, he did not have money before he became president in order to put the lock in the court. He came there, asked his friends, okay, whatever, those who voted for him. But now America comes to the realization that they did not buy what they wanted. They did not buy what they wanted. And this is when the spider web begins to hanging over the elections of the 26th year. Well, and then there is the presidency. Therefore, gentlemen, thank God, as they say, the situation is difficult but controlled. There are options, there is. No limit, I believe it will not happen. You have to solve it. You have to solve the questions. And this is the European one. This is the European world, and Europe and Ukraine are not together. And this is the process of forming a single economic political space, Europe plus Ukraine, as part of some kind of agreement. That's it, dear friends. Let me end today's video as always. Glory to Ukraine by the armed forces. The enemy will be broken. Victory will be ours. You, dear friends, hold out the courage and firm belief in our inevitable victory. Until we meet again.